Hey, everybody. It's the 19th of October, 2023. This is Plutus PBL live coding from Gimbalabs and friends. And we're going to start like we do often, but not every time, just with a quick whip around. If anybody wants to share something you've been working on lately in the course or something that you're stuck on, love to hear about that. Or if you've just been working on a development project and want to say a word about it, now's a great time. Any updates from anybody? I'll be back. Whoa. Ooh, is this the next version?
This is version 2, and this is the packaging.
Isn't like unboxing stuff a whole theme of like YouTube videos?
Yeah, so you have what you have here today is an I have to box it before you, and we can do an unboxing.
Hey.
Yeah, I'm going to Düsseldorf Summit.
Excellent. Cool.
I have talked to the guys from Cardano EU, and yeah, we're gonna maybe do some business development also.
That's awesome. I heard that from Ricardo this morning as well. That's great
ideas
news.
Floating around. So
good. I got to make sure Julie knows that that's happening. That's her hometown.
There's still tickets.
Okay.
I wanted to go to Amsterdam, but it was already full.
Really? That's kind of cool. Okay.
So
a sold out local summit.
It was like, that's a shame. Maybe I'm not going, because I was first in development and not thinking of going before I had something, but now I have something. Yeah, I want to go. So this is better for me because now I have already a connection there. So it's great.
Congrats. That's amazing. That looks like a beautiful place, Newman.
I'm walking and listening. I've been sick, so my update is I've been sick the last couple, and so I'm finally coming back around. Whenever I get unsick, I'm always like, oh, life is incredible. I don't want to die just yet. If I could get out of bed, I will. So I'm making a commitment to fresh air and clean eating.
I like it.
But by way of Cardano and projects, I have installed a little bit on the Plutus PBL. I kind of most of I've been doing the CS50 course, and so that's sort of a development project. And then other than that, I just one of the things that, my eventual project with everything will be I kind of feel like it'll be like a story or some visualization, and I just heard a thing, scrolly telling, like these scrolling data visualizations, and I came across the website Routers-Graphics. If you go to Routers, the journalism news agency, they have like a whole like info visualization section, and that's been inspiring me lately.
Yeah, data viz of collections of transactions and on-chain interactions is, I think, a wonderful frontier.
Any kind of data flow, because it kind of, the whole idea of a story breaks up that, like, the cash box or cash register is just one story. It's very sort of narrow thing, and with programmable money, which is what we're dealing with, we can do so much different. We can just make a bunch of different stories. Yeah, that's sort of my angle at the moment. And just fun, simple things, like not a big, giant, complex. Oh, I want to make all this, giant thing. I want to make a I want to make one small teeny thing. I want to make a seed, and then I want to nurture it so that it grows into something really big. But I don't want to start at the big. I don't even really want to know what a tree looks like. I want to know everything there is to know about a seed. That's sort of my thought. Because I can't pick up a giant tree, but I can put a seed in my pocket. I can't pick up a big tree.
You're describing, I think this is a really helpful metaphor for all of us to really think about the why and the how of decentralization. It's this buzzword. It's easy to villainize centralization, but I don't think it's right to like attach distinct value judgments to each of those terms. I think it's more helpful to kind of like name what's the metaphor for each of these things. And a lot of times you could say that a centralized system tries to describe the whole tree to us instead of letting it grow, right? And decentralized systems are all about cultivating seeds like you're describing, right? And letting emergence happen.
Right. Yeah, that's centralized systems trying to describe the whole tree. And I think a pitfall with that in mind is that we, as decentralized small folk, we try to build out giant trees. Like we're like, oh, it has to look like a tree. But if you ask a seed, seed to seed or seed to soil, like it doesn't know shit about a tree. It just wants to bust open.
I
it
just hope
wants
to
to put
sprout.
down a root.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm just trying to sprout here, and
Yeah.
people are trying to give me the whole thing. And I think that adds to some frustration from my own experience. And I remember back in the day when we could all make a web page, and it was just like, I can make a web page like Google, Yahoo directory or so and so, and we all. And when you say we all, I would see these sites where you would Photoshop like your name on like an office park building, or you tried to make it look like you had like a marketing department, and you would make like a phone tree, like you'd make it look like you were big. And I was like, why are we making it look like we're big? We're just, and then naturally when they did get big and a small company becomes giant, they just make it look like a giant company, and and then change their values to something else. So with that in mind, is I want to be authentic in what I'm trying to do and stay that way. Yeah. With that in mind, that's what's got my attention, and I do appreciate the chance to sort of verbalize it, because without Gimbalabs, I wouldn't be saying this right now.
Thanks, man. This is you're laying out, I think, a good and challenging mindset shift that's going to push all of us to keep refining those new metaphors and thinking about, how do you again, emergence, right? How do we not describe the whole system? Because if we're real, we don't know what it's going to be. We
Exactly.
got to build it piece by piece.
Cool. And I'm looking forward to hearing what everyone else is up to. Yeah, for sure.
What else is going on? How's everybody doing? Claudio in the chat says Aiken video 303.1. I actually just re-uploaded a version with better audio about 30 minutes ago. I think it's probably processing on YouTube, but it should be fine within the next few minutes. I also dropped a link in the Gimbalabs Discord, the PPBL channel. Jingles from Mesh just built a really cool little proof of concept showing a Mesh and Next project like we've been building on in this course, but that interacts directly with Aiken contracts. I've mentioned in a few prior meetings, Augustine wrote those lessons about module 303, and he and I together we're struggling a little bit with the slight changes to how datums and redeemers are serialized. Jingles got into the details of that, figured it out, and has an example for us. So we can add that link to the course, but it's also already in the Discord if anybody wants to check that out. I think it's a nice companion to what's already there for Module 303. Shout out to Jingles. Feel free to jump in with other updates as we go today and questions as we move along. But moving to the second item on our agenda, I just wanted to give a quick word about kind of the state of Plutus PBL right now. As everybody knows, we launched back in March. So we've been going at this point for more than half a year, 7 months since the course initially launched. We're almost to 200 people signed up for it, contributor tokens minted. And we know that some proportion of those have moved through the first few modules. And we know from being here on Wednesdays and Thursdays that there's a group of us who are really starting to collaborate, build some trust, have some new ideas together. And so the Plutus PBL course really does kind of work seasonally. It's nice that we've been running it now for 2 years. This being the 4th iteration. And we know that there's these moments of consolidation where people have signed up, they're going deeper into the course, and we're getting into those deeper, detailed and high trust conversations that we've been having more recently in this space. And we know that there will be another season for looking outwards and kind of trying to make sure that a new crop of learners knows about the course if they're interested in it. But I personally kind of see that as being in the future. We're going to continue to tweet about it. We'll continue to put out Discord messages. We'll continue to run these sessions. But also, I'm kind of excited for a season of building with this group right here. And so personally, that's where my attention is going to be, is going deep. And we have, as you all know, we have this developing project called Andamio. There's a small team of us who are really doing focused work on that right now. It doesn't feel right to start asking people right away to contribute to that, because we're also working behind the scenes to fund that work. And so we really want to build sustainably on that front. When there's funding, grow that team. But Gimbalabs is distinct from Andamio. The way that we're describing the distinction is that Andamio is the technical tool for delivering content. Gimbalabs is a place where we keep building stuff, experimenting, and coming up with educational content. And so anybody here who really feels drawn to the tinkering part, the teaching and mentorship part, and continuing to build out content that we can share, that's going to be the realm of Gimbalabs. And there's also some initial work happening right now to think about how we start to a little bit more formally establish that. So that's coming. But I just want everybody to have kind of that high level view of Andamio and Gimbalabs, where they're going. And ideally, this work we're doing right here, if you want it to route you towards contributing in one of those places, just know that we're working on that, okay? And we're actually gonna look at one of the Andamio contracts as an example today, so this can help our learning. But at a high level, does anybody have questions about that? Where we're at right now, where we're going with PPBL, or anything you disagree with and would want to kind of say a different way?
James, a little question about the Aiken stuff. I finished doing the 303 exercises and everything, but there was no commitment or any way to test the final results. So I wonder whether we're going to do that together later, or is any different plans for that?
You're exactly right. We paused on putting up an assignment because we had to figure out the datum serialization part. And so now that we have that, yeah, we got to add that part to the course, and that's going to be a critical part of whatever assignment we're able to post. We had an idea of what we want the assignment to be, but we weren't ready to publish it without being able to help with that bit. So look for that soon. I just the direct Discord message to what I was talking about for Jingles, but if anybody needs the mesh Discord server, let me throw that up here as well. Here's the direct link if anybody wants to join the mesh Discord. I just put that in the chat.
And so one thing that I wanted to ask and just clarify, so will we? I was always kind of expecting that there would be a new cohort, or there'd be like a big marketing push. Was what brought me in last March or so, and I was curious if is that a pivot from what we were planning to do before? Because I was always expecting there'd be like a new, fresh like group of 10, 20 folk like going through. Because as it is now, it seems like it's just starting. Oh. Giant truck. As it is, there are a few people sort of, one by one, coming in and joining. Could you give me some clarity on that?
That's a great question. Yeah, so there will definitely be a next cohort. The question is when we should launch it, and I guess the cadence we've been on, right? The average cadence is there's been a new cohort or a fresh launch of the course every 6 months or so for the last 2 years, 2 years divided by 4 iterations. But it's a lot of work to launch a new cohort. And so I guess I've kind of been feeling us maybe drift towards that new cohort launching sometime in early 2024. And maybe we start to have like an annualized fresh release of the course. That would feel sustainable.
Yep.
But how would that feel to you?
Yeah, so to me personally, I think that'd be great. I mean, again, we do what is what's right is right, and in the what feels correct. And I feel like a yearly thing or periodically, and then whatever it is, that makes me feel good. For whatever reason, I just feel like that would be a good, as a perpetual starter. Like I just in my mind, I'm like, oh yeah, there would be a whole new group, and that I could support them, and there'd just be new people to like learn all those things, and that like it's just like a whole new fresh thing, and all of the learnings that I went through and did with my cohort, like I feel like we can give that to them and sort of so that they can go a little farther, so that their frustrations can be like they can push it a little bit further down. Yeah. No, but that makes me feel good. Yeah. So yeah, early next year, thinking of like a new cohort, a new sort of marketing push, a new release. With all that entails, meaning like going through and making sure this stuff is correct. I saw that there were some updates, and then the building out of the sort of relationship between Gimbalabs and Andamio, and building here and finding a group of us here that are ready to build, and then being a part of the new course in next spring. Yeah, that feels really good.
I love it. If we're successful, mentors and teachers will be compensated for doing that work. And content creators, but even more, like sometimes maybe even more so than initial content creators should definitely get compensated for their work. But as important as that, I want us to design together a robust model for keeping content up to date. That's one of the hardest parts of keeping documentation, right? It's one thing to get it out there for the first time. It's hard work, but it feels really good, right? You're driving things forward, right? But updating things, it's not sexy. It's just hard, time-consuming work, right? But it's exceptionally high value. And so this is an example. If we are able to initially fund a treasury, right, and that can ensure that the mentors and content maintainers for the next iteration of the course are being compensated, that would feel to me like a really exciting way to kind of upgrade from the 2023 version to the 24 version of the course.
Yeah, I like that. That's great.
So
Thank you.
we're moving that direction. And the new course is going to be delivered on Damio, right? So our first iteration, if we go through the history, first iteration was just some people hanging around saying, hey, what are some projects we can do that we'll all learn a lot from, right? Next two iterations were done in Canvas, which is an existing kind of Web 2 learning management system. Iteration 4 is the one we're on, 2023, was in a prototype of what's now becoming Andamio. And the 2024 version will be in kind of a beta version of Andamio. So that's where we're headed. Any other questions just about that context for where we are now and where we're going? We're going to keep returning to this question of how should we spend our time together. And it gets more interesting the more invested we are in just wanting to take care of each other. But also it gets more interesting when there's some funding to make sure that this work is moving towards sustainability. There's been a lot of sprouting seeds, but not a lot of our trees have survived yet. And we're moving in that direction. Keep in mind also, there's going to be a bull market someday. And that's going to drive its own level. And I expect I'll feel nostalgic for these bear market days of connecting on this level. So we got to be ready for that. We got to be ready to really support each other and know who the real ones are when we're moving at a faster pace in that different kind of environment. Okay. So with that context, it feels really exciting to follow up on yesterday's conversation by going a little deeper into a specific application that we're building. And what we did yesterday, for anybody who missed it, is as the Andamio team, we've been building workflows for how a dApp development team can work together. As you know, we've had this concept of specialization in the course from the beginning. And it's one thing to kind of recognize at a high level, oh yeah, it's likely that some people will specialize more in writing the smart contract code in Plutus TX or Aiken or beyond. And it makes sense that some people have a lot more expertise in interface design, right? And maybe you don't want those people too focused on the smart contract. You need people who can design a beautiful user interface. And those are just two of several different ways people specialize across teams as we're building applications. On our team, we've had really Mix and Adrian have been taking the lead on smart contract development. They've gone really deep into the details, not just of writing logic for the first time. I can mock up the logic of a validator with anybody, but I'm not good enough to make it market ready. I'm not good enough to optimize it in all the ways possible. And also, Adrian and I have had some really fun back and forths because I recognize that because of his level of expertise in Plutus validator design, he's able to see possibilities that I wouldn't have even noticed. And that feels really exciting. So I can say, hey, what if we make the system work like this? And he'll say, that part really won't work, but I can see what you mean over there. Let me try to implement something. And my goodness, as a experience, this is the way I want to live, right? Just this level of collaboration. This is what I would wish for so many of us, is to be working this closely with each other and sending ideas back and forth. The way the emergent practice, nobody designed this system. Speaking of seeds and trees, the emergent practice is that Adrian and Mix will build out first the smart contracts, but then a series of bash or shell scripts that guide somebody else through the functionality of those contracts that now exist. And yesterday we looked at an example of a trace for one of the new contracts that was just finished a couple days ago. It was brand new to me as of yesterday, really getting my hands on this thing. And at Live Coding Together, we looked at a trace through the system running on a local private testnet. And that was the point where Claudio brought up the great idea that, hey, we should really be thinking about this system we're looking at in terms of state machines, like they're shown here. Okay, exactly, Mix, right? When we design these systems, we start to realize like the limits of the software we're building. And one of the exciting places my mind goes when I'm working with the bash scripts is I say, okay, well, these are great. What would the binary look like? And those binaries could be compiled from Haskell. They could be compiled from Golang. There's some really fun stuff happening there. All right, by doing things the hard way, right? By building up, we recognize the systems better that we need to build. So we did this trace yesterday. We looked at it, but all it was kind of the vertical feed of the scripts reporting to us what had happened. We saw some transactions get built. We saw some tokens get minted. We saw some transactions where some information is locked up at a validator address. And then we saw some transactions where that information is used for a learner to make a commitment, and then for that commitment to be unlocked. And it has a lot of things in common with how Plutus PBL works, but with a few really interesting upgrades that lead us to some new places. And so what I'd love to do today is take what we saw yesterday, review it for people who weren't here, and try to turn it into a state diagram. How does that sound? All right, I'll keep going unless there's any objections, but please feel free, just interrupt or raise a hand if you want to bring up a point. What's on our Miro board right here, once again, I'll share this link and everybody's welcome here. Please drop in, add notes, add questions. If I zoom out for just a second, you'll see I'm down here on the bottom next to today's agenda in this blue box right here. Okay. And just right here, there's a couple of links for background reading for anybody who's not familiar with the Plutus Pioneers treatment of state machines. There's some links here. And here's a picture from the course. And here's a picture that Mix made of a system that he was building a few months back. Piotr.
Hi.
Hey.
There's a quick question. This state machine diagram, does it relates to what you said in the beginning when you were talking about the ways of how the teams will collaborate on dApp development? Is that, yeah?
You know what? I think it's a missing piece in our current workflow. I'm really proud of how far we've come, but we don't have the perfect workflow yet. And I think better use of the diagrams we're able to draw will certainly help us collaborate even better.
But this wasn't the intention of why you put this diagram, right?
No, this diagram right here is just an example from one of our public repos where you can see, basically, I put this here just to give people an example of how emergence happens. This is one attempt to draw a picture of a system. And we've got a little diagram here to describe what are the parts of a system. Well, you've got smart contracts. You've got wallets or entities, otherwise pub key hashes, right? These are like the parties. Maybe they're people, maybe they're robots in a system. You've got datums, you've got UTXOs, and you've got notes, right? So that's a pretty good hierarchy for what we need to describe. And this picture certainly helps us to have a conversation about what this set of smart contracts can do. Eris, what do you think?
Yeah, hey everyone. I just wanted to say that I appreciate that you talked about what you guys did yesterday. I can't always make it both days, so it's nice to have that continuation and update about what happened the time prior. So thanks. Yeah.
You bet. So the point is not to go too deep into this diagram, but to give everybody just a couple of ways to look at it. You can click on these links right here, and you can see that a lot of the times, let me just open this one for a moment, right? It could also just be on a whiteboard, right? What's a good way to write a state diagram? Pencil and paper. Often, this is actually the easiest way to draw a state diagram. I would prefer this. Marker on a whiteboard, pencil on paper, that feels really good, right? So never forget that part. But also, it's nice to use software eventually. And let's just take a really quick look. This is a much simpler looking state diagram than the one below, but it doesn't quite encode as much information. What I like about this one, again, this is from really early, I think, in the Plutus PBL course, or sorry, the Plutus Pioneers course. This shows us the parties. Down here, what we're calling entities, wallets, or pub key hashes. Right? So we've got these entities, and then we've got transactions that happen. And the most important concept is that a transaction, this on-chain event that we're all familiar with, sending tokens, right? A transaction represents a state transition. Does that part feel good to everybody, right? If we're talking about the state of a blockchain, every time there's a transaction, the state of the blockchain changes. So it seems good to me to think, eventually about, that's what we're trying to describe. We're trying to describe the transactions. But sometimes when we talk about a transaction, it's helpful to distinguish between like the datum and the value. So you see the EUTXO here and the datum here. Okay. And before we can think about transactions, it also seems to me that it's helpful to think about these entities in a system. So what I was going to suggest is, what if we start just by looking at the entities that are in the system we were looking at yesterday, and then we'll start looking at the different transactions those entities can participate in. Is it okay if we do that next? Let's try it. I'm gonna go slightly wider screen, but I can zoom in on anything. Please let me know if things get too small to see, and we can zoom in anywhere. But I've got a pre-prod node running, and first things first. Oops. what I've done at this point is, after initially learning how the system works on a private testnet, my role on our team is to start now taking the Plutus part and the drafts of transactions that are shared with me and beginning to turn those into front-end components. But in order to build front-end components, I have to really understand the transaction at a granular level, and then start thinking about, okay, what am I going to need to build? What datum do I need to get? What tokens do I need to be aware of? What are the contract addresses, for example? And it helps me to have an instance of this thing running on a testnet like preview or pre-prod. In this case, I put it on pre-prod, okay? And that's what I did. I basically took the script we ran through yesterday and I broke it into some parts. And I'm realizing that I like to call that a deploy guide. So I have a directory here called run deploy guide. It has a set of steps in it, right? We can just check the balances. This is kind of going to tell us the state of our system right now. Some helper functions for just getting started, creating the wallets we need and funding them, minting some of the tokens we need, deploying or building the validators and deploying reference UTXOs. All of these parts right here are kind of the getting started bits. That's why they're called deploy. These two parts, maybe they should have a different name because they're going to happen often, right? You can have a lot of different people minting learner tokens, and you can create a lot of different modules. So maybe those are a little bit beyond deployment. And then when those things are created, we have the ability to run a couple of repeated example transactions. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I just started talking about learners. And that's what I wanted to get here for, right? Well, let's talk about those entities in the system. And if I check the balance of this system, I can see a little bit about it. So let's start there. I'm going to run this first deploy script, check balances, and see what we see. All right. So Cardano CLI results. If you've been working through this course, this should feel like home by now. Okay, and all we have here in this script is we're calling Cardano CLI UTX. We're looking at the UTXOs via Cardano CLI at a bunch of different addresses, and we're just listing those one after another. That's how Bash works, right? It allows us to just create a list of functions to run and to run them all in order. So what do we have? We have an administrator here who's this is just actually not part of the system, but I needed a wallet to grab ADA from. So I made this just for this right here and hit up the testnet faucet and then used this wallet to fund the other ones. The key roles are here. We've got learners in this system. We've got course creators in this system. And we've got course deciders. Below that, we've got a couple of reference UTXOs. If I stored the results of this query in a JSON file, for example, you would see that this UTXO has a reference script in it. You can see that I deployed all of them in the same transaction. That's why they have the same transaction hash. And if you'd like to, I'll put this hash in the chat. You can search for this hash on pre-prod Cardano scan, for example. And you can see that these three different outputs all have reference scripts attached to them. So feel free to run with that. Then down below, we've got some contracts. Okay, now these are not the actors in the system. Well, I guess these are more like the auction right here, right? This auction would represent a contract. this Bob or this Charlie would represent an entity. So we actually are seeing both of these. And in this case, we've got three contracts to think about. We've got this learner ref, we've got this course ref, we've got this assignment validator. Okay, there's a high level view of our system. But on purpose, I'm not going too deep into details. What are each of these roles? That's the question I'd like to answer together right now as we start to build up a state diagram. And I'm wondering if by building a state diagram, we'll actually hone in on some better understanding of what each of these roles are doing. But before we start that, any observations or questions about what we've seen so far? Mix, what do you think?
My question, or maybe always this struggle I was facing, how a diagram should be in details or granular, like, or should we have several diagrams, or no, one diagram which have as much as possible details? So I wonder, what do you guys think? What do you think, James, about this? Like, several diagrams, and we can just link them to each other, and we can say, hey, this is the overview. Like, hey, if you want to zoom in, go to this diagram, or next zoom, or zoom out, zoom in, or no, just one most detailed diagram which explain as much as possible a state transition, a state updating, or whatever.
Totally agree with Mix. It's really hard to have a diagram that shows everything, but also it's not too complex.
100%. Anybody else got thoughts on that one?
I mean, is this is this the whole system that you printed out there? So it's just, so I mean, and this is just a small test system. So when the system gets complicated, the diagram gets complicated, unless you can break it down into these components. And that might be what you all are talking about. But it seems like with the, I mean, that's why we've got these giant machines that can do all this stuff. It seems like a fairly straightforward process. Do you see Mix, or do you see pitfalls to that, or is it's like, ooh, there's a monster at the end of that book?
Well, problem is, Newman, if we use these machines or big machines, then we have to invent another machines to work with these machines, because these machines become complicated, and we have to create another diagram to just talk about the state of these machines, and then these become complicated. We've seen, I mean, the example I can think of right now is Kubernetes. Like, people thought about virtual machine. What if we can make it better and simpler? Okay, let's make it container. How to handle this container? Well, we have some Docker, some other platform. Things became more complicated. What should we do? Let's invent something. Kubernetes. And now we have Kubernetes. Great. Now we have several Kubernetes. What should we do? Okay, let's invent some company, some service, infrastructure as service, whatever. So, like Terraform.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I feel there is no end to it. I feel, and that somewhere in some level, developers will lose the ability to talk to each other, because things become bigger and bigger, and like in a scale, in vertical and horizontal, become vast enough so people make enough distance to not understand each other. But I mean, that's maybe very scary view. But I wonder, in first stage, like at the initial step, what would be? what would be the state you guys think is enough? Like enough descriptive, enough understandable, and enough so other people, other developer can communicate with each other. Okay, what would be that sweet spot?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the right question. And I know and I'm a map guy. I used to love maps and diagrams. It's another way of saying it. It depends on what you're using it for, right? So, like the different layers of the map or the scale of the map. I'm always thinking back of like my first experience of map going to the amusement park. They had these incredible like cartoon maps, and they just told you what you needed to know. So I guess that's my reflection is just finding the right one that's tailored to the user, depending on what they want accomplished. Yeah.
Exactly. But I should just mention that please do not allow the complexity of any system. Any system stop you to create a diagram. Like in my opinion, you can start as simple as much as possible, like writing IN on dirt and then paper and pen, and of course using these tools or diagrams or services even. But people like me, they don't stop, like they just go deeper and deeper and deeper, and suddenly like I find myself, hey, I'm just not wasting, but spending my time more on the documentation and diagrams rather than the coding, which is actually my main duty. But
Yeah.
Sorry. Yep, I think I get it.
Mix, I will say, no offense, but the first thing I feel when I look at this diagram is panic.
yeah.
Right?
You didn't
blur my eyes. I'm like, oh, that's scary.
You didn't put Adrian upgraded version of this, which has all the inputs, outputs, like all these.
We're building as we go. Okay,
Yeah,
but to connect all this, right? I think, Mix, your message about no matter how complex a scenario is, trying to diagram it, that's a deeply important message if we're going back to this conversation about decentralized systems. We've been looking closely, like as we think about whatever decentralization might actually mean. I've been looking with a lot of you and with other people across, collaborations at these concepts of evolutionary organizations or teal organizations. And one of the common threads that some writers have pointed out, there's a lot of different ways to build an evolutionary organization. That's kind of the point, right? They're adaptive. They can change. They can have an amorphous shape. All of that's really exciting. But two of the things that in general they all have in common are a focus on people. They're people positive, and they don't try to sweep complexity away. They're complexity conscious. So people positive and complexity conscious. What do centralized systems do? Often they try to tell us, oh, it's simple. Here's the soundbite. Here's the political speech, right? Here's the headline. That's the realm of centralization. In decentralized systems, we don't try to dumb things down more than they can be. We embrace the complexity. And I think that's one of the most people positive things we can do. Try to communicate. Try to communicate. This diagram is going to scare people, but you know what you did? You tried to connect to other people. When I draw a diagram, no longer am I keeping thoughts to myself. I'm bravely trying to communicate something complex, right? Will I do it perfectly? Might I embarrass myself? Probably. That's why you have friends, right? You can embarrass yourself around your friends, and we can figure out how to do this stuff together. So I think that's so beautiful, your advice to try to draw a picture of it, because I really do think there's a direct line from there to people positivity.
And yeah, I absolutely agree. And this is really important and really amazing point that why we end up with centralization, why we end up with government in first place in humanity, because things become complex in our society. And now we want to just handle it. And same thing with, of course, with our technology. And we have to first make it decentralized. And by making decentralized, I think we have to have as much as possible diagram. So people with different understanding can understand it. And then they can say, hey, I can understand this portion and I can be as a node. I won't be a center for you, but I would be as a node. I can understand from line 3 to line 6, and that's it. If you want to understand from line 7 to beyond, please move toward or forward to another person, another node. So maybe that would be the solution. Let's not create a big diagram. Let's create diagram based on our digestion ability or the people around us digestion ability. And then we can have as much as possible. And if someone wants to go a long journey, no problem. Just start from node 1 and you can go to beyond.
Amen. So let's try to describe a picture of this stuff, right? This is not the whole system, but it is a pretty good snapshot. And I think, as in everything in development and in blockchain, there's buzzwords that people catch on, right? And sometimes buzzwords, like, they take on a meaning of their own, and we kind of lose some parts of that. Like state machines, in some ways, has just been an overused term, but it's important just to recognize, look, the entire blockchain right now has state. The entire Cardano blockchain can be described as the UTXOs that exist right now. That's the state of the blockchain. When there's a transaction, that state changes. And so, right, I hope that can kind of like just demystify this concept of state machines from just a place of like priestly knowledge into, no, that's just what we're dealing with, right? Yes, we have state. Our applications change that state. Validators allow us to write rules about how that state can change. Cool. Let's try to describe it. And so, Mix, to give like a simple answer to your question, I do think that focusing on one transaction at a time is a really productive way to do things. If I can build an understanding of one transaction, then I can say, oh, okay, well, in order for that transaction to happen, where did the input UTXOs have to come from? Oh, those must have come from other transactions. Okay, I can tackle those one at a time, right? And by building from one transaction at a time, we eventually end up with a model that will ultimately look something like this. And if we have to break it into parts to make it understandable, we can keep experimenting with ways to do that.
So the core component would be transaction.
That's it. I think so.
But will you accept if I say the core component would be the data? Maybe the transaction doesn't do something, but the data does something, or no?
Are you talking data in general or datum?
Yeah. Behaving, treating transaction as a data, not like the whole thing is the transaction consists of data. So
Yeah.
maybe two transactions will be very similar to each other, but they are not.
Right. I mean, so you can represent a transaction as a data type.
No. I mean, as I understood, if you want to start a diagram or about talking about this state, the core component would be transaction. The starting point would be a transaction. I hope it would be the beginning or the initial transaction. But once we start from that, we might end up with 2 transactions or 4, it goes exponentially. But in my experience, I faced 2 very similar transactions, and there are something different in them, and that difference actually have great impact on the whole estate. For example, if especially about governance, guys, I mean, maybe something like if we have the option 5% sign a transaction. Sure, if the contract say or the transaction say it has to be 5%, but if it is 3 out of 5, the transaction is same. But do you think, guys, if 4 people sign that transaction, or 5 people sign that transaction, or 3 people sign that same transaction, do you think these 3 transactions are same? I mean, should we behave or treat them as same? So these things, in my mind, and especially I think Adrian as well, because Adrian upgraded this diagram in order to add these specific details inside its transaction. So the transaction become more clear, like the state inside the transaction, I mean. Like 4 people signing, 3 people signing, 5 people signing. And as I said, based on the contract, it doesn't matter that much. Like 3 out of 5 can sign. But in our dApp, in our logic, it is different. And actually, in terms of the fee is different. So if 4 people sign, 5 people sign, they have to pay, the user or the who's going to create that transaction need to pay more fee. So yeah, but it's good. The transaction is a core component. But
I think I have a specific example that'll help us, because it would obviously be easy to keep talking about this, but if we look at something specific, it might show a little light on this. Let's jump into the specific and come back to that. Okay, what I'm going to do is, again, starting from a single transaction, but recognizing that's not the whole system, right? It's just, we have to start somewhere. And, I'm saying we start from transaction, but it's going in the middle of the picture, right? It's not the beginning of the picture. There's stuff that comes in and there's stuff that comes out. So we're going to see that. And what I'd like to do is, I'm just going to use sticky notes for now, because it makes it really easy to move stuff around. This is just going to be a draft. What we're going to do is describe a transaction. And which one? This is going to be the one where a learner commits to assignment. Okay, that's a type of transaction in our system. Okay. And we can actually see this transaction. We can go over here and we can see, for example, in this documentation, what this transaction looks like. There's a script prepared, commit to assignment. Okay. And everybody here has been learning how to read our transactions in Cardano CLI. And this gives us a pretty good map of what this transaction is going to entail. What does it have? It has some inputs. It has an output with some data attached to it. And then it has, that's pretty much it. This looks like a pretty simple one, right? Adrian, I thought commit, where is the reference to the assignment being read in this commit transaction. Yeah.
It's not in the transaction, it's just queried from the blockchain. You just use the same module ID, so you take the data from the UTXO at the course reference validator, but you not check for it. You only check it by deciding on the assignment.
Oh, I was like, that's a really cheap transaction. That's why.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
That's nice. Okay. So in this case, in this learner scenario, there's actually no validation that you have to be committing to an assignment that actually exists. But yeah, I remember you telling me this last week. So I'm free to commit to basically anything, but if I commit to something that's not an actual assignment, I won't be able to unlock it.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason for that is that we can overcome the concurrency problem, because else we always have to have a transaction from a contract or somewhere as input, and then we cannot use it for another one, for another guy. Or
Excellent. All right. Very cool. Okay. So let's first just look at this output, right? There's really only one output. Of course, there's the change going back to the party creating this transaction. You know, we'll talk about that party in just a second. But you can see right here, the output is to this assignment validator. And it's got some Lovelace and one of these learner tokens. Let's drop that in over here, right? So we know that an output here this is the assignment validator contract. Is going to have some value, right? And again, right, immediately this gets messy, and I risk embarrassing myself by just trying to do a little something here, but we can always clean up how it looks. And so this gets UTXO with one learner token and some datum that describes the assignment. Right? Okay. And I'm just doing this loosely because I have to start somewhere, but there'll probably be better ways to think about this. Okay, so like the one output of this transaction is this guy. And it's in this contract address. Any questions here, or is there, would you like me to change anything about how this looks so far? So next we can say, all right, well, where did the inputs to that come from? And they're all coming from the same wallet. All right. I notice in this transaction, for example, there's no TX ins from any contract addresses. I know that because none of these TX ins are followed by the information about the Plutus script, the datum, and the redeemer that would be required, right? They're just plain TX ins. And there's only one signer right here. Right, so I'm safe to assume that all of these TXNs are coming from the wallet of the one signer that we've specified. What are they? Well, one of them just has some ADA in it. We're often going to need that to pay some fees, of course. And we're reusing that same TXN for collateral. That's a common pattern. But the TXN I'm really interested in is this one, the one that had the token. And this was just calculated up here. There's some helper functions in Bash running this for us, right? But it's being pulled from the learner's wallet, okay? And this is what you've already seen in the course, is that when you commit to a module, your token gets locked up. So it's the same thing happening here. So I'll keep using purple for UTXOs for now. And that's going to be an input. But maybe I need another color to represent an entity. In this case, the entity is the learner. How does that feel?
James,
Question? Yeah.
this diagram is from the perspective of a learner? Or does it matter what perspective we choose in order to?
That's a great question. That's a really good question. All I'm trying to do is draft a diagram that represents this and only this transaction. I recognize now there's some other information in the system, the state of this system, that has other implications. But before I even try to think about that, my goal is first to draw a picture of this transaction. So you tell me, like, how can I look at this transaction from a different perspective to get some insights?
But I think this transaction right now, this perspective is from the person who is doing it, who is paying the fee. And it is very important who is going to pay the fee. But now if we want to think about it, a perspective from Andamio or from the dApp, now the thing, as Adrian mentioned actually, we should think like, okay, does this guy have an assignment to commit to? Like, is there any previous state that this person learner can now interact, and now there is something, or no? Should we prepare that assignment or that ID, so now they can submit to it? And if yes, okay, now they submit. Now what should they do? How should that person move forward? And for example, right now in terms of learner, I mean perspective of learner, I think learner will do just 2 transactions, if I'm right. One would be commit, and another would be distribute, kind of. I mean, it's signing the transaction, is not.
Right, that's a different transaction. That's it. So Adrian and I were just talking about this a few minutes ago, right? We could design this transaction. Remember, I'm focused on only one transaction, and I'm forcing myself to not think about anything else yet, right? Now, the moment you're done diagramming one transaction, what questions follow? Oh, where did those inputs come from? What happens next to these outputs? Of course, that has to follow, right? But if my goal is to try to create a diagram of one transaction, I think it's really helpful to only focus on that transaction first, decide that we're really happy with it, and then build what you're saying, these next parts. Now, this idea, does the assignment exist? That's an important question for the design of our system. And we could have built the validators such that they would only validate if this datum right here was pointing to a valid assignment. But we didn't do that. And that's actually, there's really good reasons to make that choice. That means this is a less expensive transaction. The system runs better. There will be validation about whether that assignment actually exists. But in this implementation, it doesn't happen at this step, right? So like you're saying, like, is it valid information to know that the assignment the learner is committing to is actually a real assignment? Yes. Does this transaction care about that? At this point, no. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, indeed. But now I'm thinking, if we want to move forward to the second transaction, like the next step.
Well, are we done? Are we done? Have we represented every input to this transaction? Not exactly, right? We might want to name the fees. And just to be exhaustive here for just a minute, I could decide in my state diagram that I'm not going to list every single UTXO. But let's not decide that yet. Let's list all of them. So I'm going to need another UTXO. This is the fees and collateral from learner, right? And I don't know, what's the best way to represent this? Can I take all the purple ones and make them a little bit smaller? My UTXOs, I'll use a smaller size. And that'll allow me to just kind of stick them around these guys. So this guy can go here. And this one here. That's an input. And then there's going to be, the learner gets back over here, the change. Right. And I'm doing this kind of fast and loose just to model a drafting process, right? I'm not saying this is a good model, but it's kind of looking a bit like what we see over here, right? Here you've got Bob before, and you've got Bob after. Now, this state diagram seems to be saying like the total amount of tokens that this entity is holding. I guess I'm ignoring that part in my current diagram, and that's a choice that we could make, right? Should we try to include the entire balance of the learner's wallet, or does that matter to the way I'm drawing it over here? But I hope you can see, like, this diagram right here actually has a lot in common with the way this thing is being built. And at this point, I now have, I'm taking one shortcut. I'm only talking about this UTXO once, even though it does appear in Cardano CLI as two different things, but it's the same UTXO. So I feel okay about only writing that one once. I represented this one. I represented this output. I put a note that there's some datum on that output, but I'm not totally happy with that yet. And I've got the change address. Yeah, that's all here. All right. So once again, I took a shortcut here by just putting fees and collateral. That's the same UTXO. And I'm not totally satisfied with the way I just wrote assignment datum right here, but at least it's initially represented on this transaction. So far, so good. I agree, Piotr. Yeah, there's the more you dip into this stuff, the easier and easier it's going to be to start building tools that automate different parts of the process, right? Okay. So we've got this. Any objections to now moving beyond this transaction? Anything else we should look at here?
I just thought to maybe it is unnecessary, but the order of these UTXO matter because like in transaction, if you put the UTXO assignment in top of the UTXO for maybe even change or somewhere else, they get different index.
Right.
I don't know, it does matter, the order, but.
Mhm. Right, the identifier for the UTXO will be different depending on how I order them in a transaction. But the value they hold, that's the thing I'm concerned about here, right? I'm not in this diagram too concerned about what the identifier for the UTXO itself is. Okay, so Mix gave us some examples of questions that we could ask next here. And if the idea is that we can keep building this diagram out in either direction by continuing to ask questions like, where did these come from? Or where are these going? Does anybody have a next question you'd like us to look at just based on this diagram right here?
Should we include like the redeemer that triggers this transition from the state from inputs to outputs?
Yes, we should. We definitely should. Notice that this transaction right here doesn't have a redeemer. It's only locking at a contract address, right? So we wrote this datum. The first thing I would change about the diagram so far is I would maybe be a little bit more specific about this datum somehow. But in the diagram as it is, there's no redeemer yet. So one question we could ask is, hey, where are we going to see the redeemer that unlocks this? Can we try that as a place to kind of, I know we only have a few minutes left, as a place to wrap today? Could we start to think about the transaction that's going to unlock this? And we can think about how to maybe represent a redeemer on here. So we've got this entity. We've got UTXOs. We're putting these UTXOs next to the contracts or entities that they're related to. But we kind of recognize this pattern that's happening, right? The purple UTXOs are going into the yellow transactions. The colors don't matter, right? But it's just giving us a pattern. So what I expect to have is that, okay, well, somehow this UTXO is going to be consumed by some other transaction. Where it gets interesting is actually there's two ways to unlock this UTXO. One is by approving that the assignment is complete. But there's another transition where you're saying, no, that assignment is denied. And each of these is going to represent a different state transition and a different pathway into what happens next. Does that make sense?
There's also another option. The learner can unlock it without approval or denying.
Oh, yeah. What did you call that one?
Learner unlock, I think. Not sure.
Okay. I'm sticking with it for now. Right on. Perfect. Okay. So now, and this is where diagrams, of course, is this going to get a little bit more complex? Of course it is, but like, this is what we expect a system to do, right? Okay. Fine, you locked that thing. Now there's 3 transitions out of the state where the learner is committed to an assignment and into some future states.
If we are totally correct, there's another one, or the learner unlock is learner action, and he can do almost anything with the datum. And
That's right, yeah.
value.
Right. And I think the reason I'm drawing this diagram is I want to finish today by going now into the source code for just a minute. Let's look at this validator. So this is the assignment. This is the decision validator, right? Yeah. And everybody's on their own journey, but we're all building up our knowledge about how redeemers work. The redeemer in this case is called assignment decision action. And as is a common pattern in these validators, we're able to say, okay, well, the action is going to be one of the following cases. And here's that language we were just looking at, right? We've got deny. Oh, accept. I said approve, right? And then student action. So let's just update that language for just a second. This is accept, deny, and student action. And we don't need this. Actually, look at this. These 3 transactions, which are the ways to unlock a UTXO from this validator, in their names, they're essentially encoding the redeemer. So where does redeemer go in a state diagram? We can kind of think of redeemer as being the name of a state transition out of a validator address. Claudia, how do you feel about that?
Sounds good. I mean, we are getting to refine our understanding. You see, basically, we're drawing that the fact that Cardano uses UTXOs, we are drawn to reveal the account balance model, really, because the state of the blockchain is a bunch of addresses which hold UTXOs at those addresses. Those are our balances. So we are manipulating those UTXOs as a basic unit of transitions. So that's great. The entities you have with the purple sticky nodes, those are the accounts and their balances, basically. And now we are making a transition, and those constitute our state. And we are making transitions between those states. So I feel that instead of having these separate yellow boxes for the different transitions, we should have the yellow box being the validator and maybe having sticky notes for the different redeemers going into them. Maybe something more, but I'm not clear what should be the ultimate way to represent that. I'm sorry.
No, that's great.
We should think about it maybe for the next time.
I think that's beautiful. That's a great frame. Yeah, so I'm just playing over here while you say that, right? Like I could make another sticky that says redeemer, and it's kind of like the thing that gets me into the transaction in the first place is my redeemer, my statement of intent. And often I'm going to have to include some other information if I have a parameterized redeemer, like deny is, or like accept is. And then you're exactly right. Yeah, maybe these yellow boxes, it's hard to say, right? I was trying to use them as transactions, and I was trying to show how like every transaction has inputs and outputs, but maybe that limits us in some other ways. So yeah, just food for thought. but hopefully this feels like a helpful first adventure into kind of building out diagrams, right? There's best practices emerging. I've tried to do this more formally before, but haven't been happy with the results yet. So as an exercise, this feels good to just sketch like we're doing right here, right? You can see other attempts at just explaining in general this relationship between transactions and UTXOs. But a lot of them have the same, there's a lot of common patterns here, right? We're trying to figure out how we describe transactions. That's what we have. Any last questions or thoughts for the road before we break for today?
Well, it is just really interesting that, for example, in civil engineering, if you want to build a building, first you will create that a structure and a scratch, a blueprint. But I don't know why in software development, first you will create that application, then you will start to create a building or a blueprint for that. So if you guys can do this at the beginning, before creating any transaction or any smart contract, that would be great, I think, in my opinion. Creating this diagram, and then you can just hands off these to the developer and say, hey, just follow this diagram and create these logics and these and that. But yeah, that's kind of sad reality in software development. We build first, and then we will try to figure out what the hell we built.
It's exacerbated by the fact that the programming languages are new, right? There's a future state that we can imagine where there are best practices here. There's a future state where you draw the diagram and AI writes the validators for you, right? So this is where we can eventually get to, but a lot of the reason why we're beholden to that kind of build first and model later is because we're still often in the position of just like tinkering with what we can do in the first place. That's rapidly changing. Right? Nelson and I have been aligning on a blueprint that we're really excited about for building transactions in the front end, but it wouldn't look like it looks now if we hadn't tried to build some things first. That brings us full circle, right? That brings us full circle, weeds and trees.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's that full circleness is super important. I wanted to jump on and say thank you, lots of gratitude for this. The conversation was wonderful. This idea of abstraction and complexity is really important. Drawing these things out for me as a learner is absolutely key to sort of onboard and do everything. I do want to say this about visualizations. I was taking this randomly like a YouTube data science or no, how to do Excel, and the guy was saying, he's like, look, the visualization is your goal. Like that's what you're trying to get to, and so I'm like, oh right, this is how we take in as humans, like we are the way we visualize, and like that's why it has impact and powerful, and it can communicate to a great big team. So the idea of getting to the visualization and then ping-ponging back to the code, and that's how I work out problems. And if we're problem solving here, like I want to see it, and then like if I get stuck in the code, if I can write it down, then it's easy for me to like troubleshoot, and then I can come back to the code. So this sort of ebb and flow back and forth between this visual and the conceptual, the abstract and the concrete, the code and the visualization, I think is super important, super duper important. Yeah, really great work today.
Thanks, man. It's a really good growth area for us. We started by talking about PBL 24, and PPBL 2023, I think, is lacking in the kinds of visualizations it could show. That's absolutely a growth area for the course. And if we start to think ahead to maybe what's the small handful of focused areas that we really want to improve on, that would be a pretty exciting one, I think, to have on the list.
Awesome.
Rock and roll.
Awesome.
Martin.
Yeah, with industrial design, you have a whole process you don't just start. It is, you do like focus groups, talk to every party involved. And then you make a list of requirements, what needs to be done, including rules and regulations. And then you make concepts with brainstorming sessions. And these are usually like simplified models of what you want to do. So you will model your performance, maybe, if that's important. And then you make usually 3 or more concepts. So you can compare. So it's not like, oh, we're going to do this. You usually have, I know, we're going to do this. It's perfect. And it turns out that it's wrong. But yeah, sometimes hard with software because it takes such a long time to build. But in fact, you shouldn't build one. You should build multiple. And then you can compare what you want.
It also helps to have collaborators in all of this. Everything everybody's saying, this is desired future state that we are describing.
It's a loop process. So in every stage, you iterate with everybody involved.
That's right.
How you're, happy with the process. But this book is this big, so.
Well, let's get there, right? We need collaborators to get there together, and to do that iterative process. But I think that's what we're here to design. So let's keep going. Hey, I'm late for the next call, unfortunately.
Yep.
But this was fun, and yeah.
Thank you, James. Thank you, everyone.
Thoughts. See you soon.
Bye.
Yeah.